On a rain-slick Thursday in Briar Hollow, Kentucky, Eleanor Mae Whitaker arrived at the Jefferson County Courthouse wearing a gray dress suit that looked like Sunday morning and a smile that belonged to a martyr. At 68 years old, she moved through the gathered cameras with the careful grace of someone who knew exactly how much sympathy a trembling hand could buy. For Eleanor, this was not justice. This was theater. She had been charged only with possession of an unregistered firearm, a technicality that let her bathe in the warm light of public pity as reporters drank in every soft sigh and dabbed eye. In her telling, a terrible accident had stolen her son-in-law's life, a tragedy born of panic and unfortunate circumstance. But beneath the hymns and handkerchiefs, beneath the whispered prayers and careful tears, waited the truth. She had gone to Daniel Cross's house that February night with a plan. The prosecution had promised that this case was never about paperwork or permits. It was about blood. As neighbors would testify and relatives would cry, Eleanor would play the role of grandmother saint to absolute perfection. But the courtroom would soon learn there was something else waiting in the wings. A single piece of evidence existed. One video, one confession, one moment captured in digital clarity that would detonate the lie from the inside. When it finally appeared on the screen before the jury, there would be no sermons left to preach. By the time Judge Marion Kendrick spoke Eleanor's name for the last time, the performance would be over. The arraignment took place on a cold March morning. The courtroom was smaller than Eleanor had expected, more intimate, which meant the cameras in the gallery could capture every flicker of her carefully composed face. She sat beside her attorney, Marcus Bellamy, a defense lawyer from Louisville with silver hair and a reputation for getting grandmothers acquitted. Eleanor wore pearl earrings. She had chosen them specifically because they caught the light. Judge Kendrick entered, and everyone rose. The judge was a woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that had seen 3 decades of liars. She looked at Eleanor once, just once, and Eleanor felt something cold pass through that gaze before the judge looked down at her paperwork. The state of Kentucky versus Eleanor Mae Whitaker, the clerk announced. Case number 2025-3478. The defendant is charged with possession of an unregistered firearm. Eleanor noticed how the word possession sounded so clean, so administrative. Nothing about blood. Nothing about Daniel lying on his kitchen floor with a hole in his chest. The prosecutor stood. His name was Vincent Harrow, and he was younger than Eleanor had hoped, maybe 40, with dark eyes and the kind of quiet intensity that made her uncomfortable. He did not grandstand. He simply said, "Your Honor, the state requests the defendant enter a plea." Judge Kendrick looked at Eleanor. "Ms. Whitaker, how do you plead to the charge of possession of an unregistered firearm?" Eleanor stood slowly, making sure her knees looked weak. "Not guilty, Your Honor," she said. And her voice was small and sweet, like a grandmother reading bedtime stories. Marcus Bellamy rose beside her. "Your Honor, my client is a retired school teacher with no prior criminal record. This is a tragic accident that has devastated her family. We ask the court to consider her age, her health, and her deep roots in this community when setting bail." Vincent Harrow did not look at Eleanor. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor, the state believes this charge may be amended as the investigation continues. We ask for bail to be set at $100,000. The gallery murmured. Eleanor let her eyes widen, let her hand go to her throat. Amended. That word hung in the air like smoke. Judge Kendrick set bail at $75,000. Eleanor's daughter mortgaged her house to post it. As Eleanor left the courthouse, she stopped on the steps, turned toward the cameras, and whispered a prayer for Daniel's soul. She made sure they could see her lips moving. She made sure a tear slid down exactly one cheek. That night, Detective Sarah Rowan sat in her office and looked at the photographs spread across her desk. She had been the first investigator on the scene at Daniel Cross's house, and something about Eleanor's story had never sat right with her. The gun had been found near the kitchen doorway. Daniel's body had been in the center of the kitchen. Eleanor claimed she had been trying to leave, that the gun had gone off accidentally when she stumbled near the door. But the blood spatter told a different story. Detective Rowan had worked homicides for 12 years. She knew what panic looked like. She knew what accidents looked like. And she knew what execution looked like. This looked like execution. She picked up the phone and called the county prosecutor's office. When Vincent Harrow answered, she said, "We need to talk about Eleanor Whitaker. This was not an accident." The second chapter of Eleanor's performance began 2 weeks later when the trial officially commenced. The courtroom was packed. Briar Hollow was a small town, and a grandmother on trial was the kind of spectacle that drew crowds. Eleanor wore navy blue this time, with a small gold cross at her throat. She had lost weight. She made sure everyone noticed. The prosecution's first witness was Margaret Chen, Eleanor's next-door neighbor for 15 years. Margaret was 72, with white hair and a voice that shook when she spoke. She had called 911 the night Daniel died. Vincent Harrow approached the stand with his hands in his pockets, casual, like they were having coffee. "Ms. Chen, can you describe the night of February 14th? Margaret nodded. "I heard Eleanor's car pull into her driveway around 9:30 at night. I remember because I was watching the news. Then maybe 20 minutes later, I heard her screaming." "What kind of screaming?" "Hysterical, like someone dying. I ran outside and she was on her porch, just wailing, saying there had been an accident, saying Daniel was dead." "How did she seem to you?" "Shaken, devastated. She could barely stand." Vincent Harrow nodded. "And you called 911? "Yes. I stayed with her until the police came. She kept saying it was an accident, that the gun just went off." Marcus Bellamy stood for cross-examination. He was gentle with Margaret, grandfatherly. "Ms. Chen, you've known Eleanor for 15 years, correct?" "Yes." "In all that time, have you ever known her to be violent?" "Never. Eleanor is the kindest woman I know." "Thank you. No further questions." Eleanor watched Margaret leave the stand and allowed herself a small, sad smile. The jury saw it. The cameras saw it. She was a grieving grandmother, supported by her community, destroyed by a terrible accident. But Vincent Harrow was just getting started. During a recess, Marcus Bellamy pulled Eleanor into a small conference room. His face was tight with frustration. "Eleanor, I need you to stop performing for the cameras." She blinked at him, all innocence. "I don't know what you mean." "The crying on cue, the trembling hands. The judge is watching you, and she is not impressed." "I am devastated, Marcus. My son-in-law is dead. Am I not allowed to grieve?" He leaned forward. "Grieve, yes. Perform? No. Judge Kendrick has seen 1,000 defendants try to manipulate her courtroom. You need to be genuine, not theatrical." Eleanor's eyes went cold for just a moment, a flash of something sharp and calculating. Then she softened again, reached across the table, and patted his hand. "I understand. I will try to compose myself." But she did not try. When court resumed and the prosecutor called his next witness, Eleanor made sure every camera in the gallery caught her wiping away tears with a lace handkerchief. The cracks in Eleanor's story began to show on the fourth day of trial. Detective Rowan took the stand, and the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. She was composed, professional, and methodical. She did not perform. She simply told the truth. Vincent Harrow walked her through the crime scene. Detective Rowan, when you arrived at Daniel Cross's residence on February 14th, what did you observe? The victim was lying on his back in the center of the kitchen. Single gunshot wound to the chest. Time of death was estimated at approximately 9:15 post-meridiem. The defendant was in her vehicle in the driveway, being attended to by paramedics. What did she tell you when you first spoke with her? She said she had gone to Daniel's house to talk about custody arrangements for her granddaughter. She said Daniel became agitated and she became frightened. She said she had brought a gun for protection, that she tried to leave, and the gun discharged accidentally near the doorway. Did the physical evidence support this account? Detective Rowan's jaw tightened. No, it did not. Vincent Harrow approached the evidence table and picked up a photograph. Detective, this is a crime scene photo showing the kitchen doorway. Can you describe what you see? The gun was found approximately 3 feet from the doorway, near the threshold. There was no evidence of a struggle in that location. No overturned furniture, no scuff marks, nothing to indicate a stumble or fall. And where was the victim's body? 12 feet from the doorway, in the center of the kitchen. What does that tell you? It tells me the shot was fired from a distance. If the gun had discharged during a struggle or a stumble near the doorway, the victim would not be 12 feet away. The jury leaned forward. Eleanor's smile faltered. Marcus Bellamy objected. Speculation, Your Honor. Judge Kendrick looked at Detective Rowan. Did you examine the trajectory of the bullet? Yes, Your Honor. The bullet entered the victim's chest at a slightly downward angle, consistent with the shooter standing upright and aiming, not consistent with a weapon discharging during a fall. Objection overruled. Continue, Mr. Harrow. Vincent Harrow pulled out another photograph. Detective, did you also examine the scene outside the residence? Yes. There had been a light snowfall earlier that evening. We found footprints leading from the defendant's vehicle to the front door. How many sets of footprints? 2 sets. Both matched the defendant's boots, which we later collected as evidence. 2 sets. 1 set going to the house, 1 set leaving the house. Eleanor's attorney leaned over and whispered something to her, but she ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on Detective Rowan with something that looked like hatred. Vincent Harrow walked back to the prosecution table, then turned. Detective, what did the 2 sets of footprints tell you? They told me the defendant had entered the residence earlier than she claimed. The first set of prints was partially filled with fresh snow, indicating they were made at least an hour before the second set. What time did the defendant say she arrived at the residence? She claimed she arrived around 9 post-meridiem, shortly before the shooting. But the footprints suggest she arrived earlier? Yes, likely around 8 post-meridiem or earlier. What is significant about that time difference? Detective Rowan looked directly at Eleanor. It means she was inside the house for over an hour before the shooting. That is inconsistent with her story of a brief confrontation followed by panic. The courtroom was silent. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. For the first time, her performance cracked, and something ugly flickered across her face. Marcus Bellamy did his best on cross-examination, suggesting the footprints could have been from an earlier visit. But Detective Rowan was unshakable. She had documented everything. She had time-stamped the snowfall. She had measured the depth of snow in each print. The science was clear. When Detective Rowan stepped down, Eleanor leaned over to Marcus and hissed, "She is trying to destroy me." Marcus whispered back, "She is doing her job, and you need to stop glaring at her. The jury is watching." That night, Vincent Harrow sat in his office with Detective Rowan and the case files spread between them. They were building toward something, and they both knew it. The footprints, the trajectory, the timeline, all of it pointed to premeditation. But they needed more. They needed something undeniable. "What about the phone records?" Vincent asked. Detective Rowan pulled out a file. Eleanor's phone pinged off a cell tower near Daniel's house at 7:52 post-meridium. She made no calls, sent no texts. She just sat there. For over an hour? For over an hour. Then at 9:14 post-meridium, her phone pinged again when she left the property. Vincent leaned back in his chair. She was waiting. She was waiting, Detective Rowan agreed. For what? I do not know yet, but I will find out. The trial continued. Vincent Harrow called a forensic analyst who testified about the blood spatter patterns, confirming that Daniel had been standing still when he was shot, not lunging or struggling. He called a ballistics expert who explained that the angle and velocity of the bullet indicated deliberate aim, not accidental discharge. Each piece of evidence was another nail in Eleanor's coffin. But she continued to perform. She fainted once, delicately, during testimony about Daniel's autopsy. The bailiff called a recess. Cameras captured Eleanor being helped to a chair, her face pale, her breathing shallow. It played on the evening news. Public opinion remained divided. Half the town saw a grieving grandmother. The other half saw a murderer. On the 8th day of trial, Vincent Harrow introduced evidence that shifted the entire narrative. He called Eleanor's daughter to the stand. Rebecca Cross was 34 years old. She had been married to Daniel for 7 years. They had one daughter, Lily, age 5. Rebecca looked like she had not slept in months. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands shook as she was sworn in. Eleanor stiffened in her seat. This was not part of the plan. Rebecca was supposed to support her, to testify that Daniel had been dangerous, that Eleanor had been protecting her granddaughter. They had discussed this. They had rehearsed it. But Rebecca did not look at her mother. Vincent Harrow spoke gently. "Miss Cross, I know this is difficult. Can you tell the court about your marriage to Daniel?" Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "It was not a good marriage." "Can you elaborate?" "Daniel could be cruel. He had a temper. He said things that hurt." "Did he ever physically harm you?" Rebecca hesitated. Eleanor leaned forward, willing her daughter to say yes, to give the jury a reason, a justification. "No," Rebecca said. "He never hit me. He never hit Lily." Eleanor's jaw clenched. Vincent Harrow pulled out a document. "Miss Cross, I am showing you what has been marked as Exhibit 23. Can you identify this?" Rebecca looked at the paper, and her eyes filled with tears. "It is an email I sent to a family lawyer." "When did you send this email?" "January 15th, 1 month before Daniel died." "Can you read the highlighted portion for the court?" Rebecca's voice broke. "I wrote, I am considering divorce. I need to understand my options for custody of my daughter. I am afraid if I leave him, he will fight me for Lily out of spite." "You were planning to leave your husband?" "Yes." "Did you tell your mother about this?" Rebecca finally looked at Eleanor. Her face was a mask of anguish and anger. "Yes, I told her everything." "What did she say?" "She said she would take care of it. She said I did not need to worry. She said Daniel would not be a problem much longer. The courtroom erupted. Judge Kendrick banged her gavel. Eleanor went white. Marcus Bellamy shot to his feet. "Objection! Hearsay! This is highly prejudicial." Judge Kendrick looked at Vincent Harrow. "Mr. Harrow?" "Your Honor, this goes to motive. The defendant knew her daughter wanted to leave Daniel. She knew there would be a custody fight, and she decided to eliminate the problem." Judge Kendrick thought for a moment. "I will allow it. Objection overruled." Marcus Bellamy sat down heavily. Eleanor grabbed his arm and whispered furiously, "She is lying. I never said that." But Marcus was not listening. He was watching the jury, and he could see the shift in their faces. They were no longer looking at Eleanor with sympathy. They were looking at her with suspicion. Vincent Harrow continued. "Ms. Cross, did your mother ever express hostility toward Daniel?" "All the time. She hated him. She thought he was not good enough for me. After Lily was born, it got worse. She said he was a bad father, that he was irresponsible, that Lily deserved better." "Did you ask your mother to confront Daniel on February 14th? "No. I did not even know she was going to his house that night." "When did you find out your husband was dead?" Rebecca's face crumpled. "The police came to my door around 11 post-meridiem. They told me there had been a shooting. I could not believe it. Then they told me my mother had been there, that she had done it." "How did you feel?" "I felt sick. I felt angry. I felt like my whole world had ended." "Miss Cross, I need to ask you this. Do you believe your mother shot your husband accidentally?" Rebecca looked at Eleanor. Mother and daughter locked eyes across the courtroom, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence and pain. "No," Rebecca whispered. "I do not believe it was an accident." Eleanor stood up. "How dare you?" she said, her voice loud and sharp. "How dare you betray me like this?" Judge Kendrick slammed her gavel. "Ms. Whitaker, sit down now, or you will be held in contempt." Marcus Bellamy pulled Eleanor back into her seat, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the mask slip. They had seen the anger, the arrogance, the sense of entitlement. This was not a grieving grandmother. This was someone used to being obeyed. During the lunch recess, Marcus Bellamy confronted Eleanor in the holding room. "You need to control yourself. You just handed the prosecution a gift?" Eleanor paced back and forth, her gray dress swishing. "My own daughter. My own flesh and blood. She is up there lying to save herself." "Is she lying?" Eleanor stopped pacing and glared at him. "Of course she is lying." "Did you tell her you would take care of Daniel?" "I told her I would talk to him. That is all." "Eleanor, if you are not being honest with me, I cannot defend you. Did you go to that house intending to kill him?" She met his eyes, and for the first time, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. There was no grief there, no remorse, only cold calculation. "Of course not," she said smoothly. "It was an accident." But Marcus Bellamy did not believe her anymore. The trial moved into its second week. The prosecution was building a fortress of evidence. Emails between Eleanor and Rebecca about Daniel's behavior. Text messages where Eleanor called Daniel worthless, dangerous, unfit. A witness who saw Eleanor purchasing ammunition 3 days before the shooting. Another witness, a clerk at a sporting goods store, who remembered Eleanor asking about how to properly load and fire a revolver. Vincent Harrow painted a picture of a woman who had decided her son-in-law was a problem and had taken it upon herself to solve that problem permanently. Eleanor's story of an accidental discharge was falling apart, but Marcus Bellamy still had a defense. He argued that Eleanor had brought the gun for protection because she genuinely feared Daniel. He argued that the shooting, while intentional in the moment, had been a panicked response to a perceived threat. He argued that the state had not proven premeditated murder, only a tragic confrontation that went wrong. The jury listened. Some of them looked convinced. Eleanor began to hope again. Then the prosecution announced they had one more witness. On the 10th day of trial, Vincent Harrow stood before the court and said, "Your Honor, the state calls Special Agent Denise Cho from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cybercrimes Division." The gallery murmured. Cybercrimes. This was new. Agent Cho was in her mid-30s, with black hair pulled into a neat ponytail and sharp, intelligent eyes. She carried a laptop and a folder full of technical documents. When she was sworn in, she sat with perfect posture and waited. Vincent Harrow approached. "Agent Cho, can you explain your role in this investigation?" "I was asked by Detective Rowan to examine a piece of digital evidence recovered from the victim's home." "What was that evidence?" "A wireless nanny camera system installed in the nursery of the victim's home." Eleanor's breath caught. Her hands went numb. Vincent Harrow continued, "Can you describe this system?" "It is a commercially available wireless camera designed to allow parents to monitor their children. The camera records video and audio continuously and stores the footage on a cloud server. The victim had installed the system approximately 8 months before his death to monitor his daughter's room." "Did you examine the footage from February 14th? "Yes." "What did you find?" Agent Cho opened her laptop. "I found a continuous recording from 7:45 post-meridium until 9:16 post-meridium on February 14th. The camera was positioned to view the nursery, but the nursery door was open, and the camera also captured a portion of the hallway and the kitchen entrance." "What did the recording show?" Agent Cho took a breath. At 7:53 post-meridium, the defendant, Eleanor Whitaker, entered the frame. She was visible in the hallway outside the nursery. She appeared to be waiting. "For how long?" "Approximately 1 hour and 11 minutes. The courtroom was dead silent. Vincent Harrow walked to the evidence table and picked up a flash drive. "Your Honor, the state would like to enter Exhibit 47. This is the authenticated video file from the nanny camera." Judge Kendrick looked at Eleanor. "Any objection from the defense?" Marcus Bellamy stood slowly. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Your Honor, may we approach?" At the bench, Marcus whispered, "Your Honor, I was not informed of this evidence." Vincent Harrow's voice was ice. "It was disclosed 3 days ago. I sent it directly to your office. I never received it." Vincent pulled out a delivery confirmation email. "Your paralegal signed for it." Marcus's face went gray. He looked back at Eleanor, sitting at the defense table with her hands folded and her eyes wide. She had known. She had known about this video and she had not told him. Judge Kendrick made her decision. "The evidence is admitted. Mr. Harrow, you may proceed." Agent Cho connected her laptop to the courtroom monitor. Eleanor watched as the screen flickered to life. She felt the walls closing in. She felt the air being sucked from the room. This was it. This was the end. The video began. The timestamp read 7:53 post-meridian. The image was grainy, but clear. The camera was angled to show a child's room, pastel walls, a crib, stuffed animals. But through the open door, the hallway was visible. And standing in that hallway, just barely in frame, was Eleanor. She was wearing the same gray coat she had been wearing when the police arrived. She was holding her purse. She was standing perfectly still, watching. The kitchen entrance. Minutes passed. On the video, Eleanor did not move. She just waited. At 8:04 post-meridium, Daniel Cross entered the frame. He walked down the hallway toward the nursery, talking on his phone. He did not see Eleanor. He was too focused on his conversation. Then he turned and saw her. The audio was muffled but audible. Daniel's voice, confused. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" Eleanor's voice, calm and cold. "We need to talk about Rebecca and Lily." "Rebecca knows you are here?" "No." Daniel ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "You cannot just show up at my house, Eleanor. You need to leave." "Not until we talk." Daniel stepped closer, and his voice grew harder. "There is nothing to talk about. Rebecca and I are fine. Lily is fine. You need to stop interfering." Eleanor's voice did not rise. It stayed eerily steady. "Rebecca wants to leave you. She is going to file for divorce." Daniel's face twisted. "That is between me and my wife. It is none of your business. Lily is my business. Lily is my daughter." Eleanor took a step forward. "You are not fit to be her father." And then Daniel said the words that sealed his fate. He leaned close to the camera, close enough that his face filled the frame, and he said, "You want to know the truth, Eleanor? You want to know why Rebecca is so scared all the time? It is not because of me. It is because of you. You smother her. You control her. You make her feel like she cannot breathe. And Lily is going to grow up the same way if you do not back off." He paused, and his voice dropped to something cruel. "And if Rebecca tries to leave me, I will fight her for custody. I will tell the court about your crazy, controlling behavior. I will make sure you never see Lily again. Do you understand me?" "Never." Eleanor's face on the video did not change. She just nodded slowly. Then she said, "I understand." And she turned and walked out of frame. The timestamp showed 8:09 post-meridium. For the next hour, the video showed nothing but the empty hallway. The nursery was still. The house was silent. Then, at 9:11 post-meridium, Eleanor reappeared. She was carrying a revolver. Her face was set. Her hands were steady. She walked with purpose. Daniel's voice came from the kitchen. "Eleanor, I thought you left." Eleanor did not answer. She walked toward the kitchen, out of the camera's view. For 3 seconds, there was silence. Then a single gunshot cracked through the audio. A thud. Silence. At 9:14 post-meridium, Eleanor walked back past the camera. She was no longer carrying the gun. Her face was expressionless. She walked out the front door without looking back. The video ended. The courtroom was frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. The jury stared at the screen, then at Eleanor. Eleanor sat at the defense table, and for the first time since the trial began, her performance shattered completely. The color drained from her face. Her hands, which had been so carefully folded, began to tremble. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Marcus Bellamy dropped his pen. It clattered onto the table, the only sound in the room. Vincent Harrow let the silence stretch. He wanted the jury to feel the weight of what they had just seen. Then he turned to Agent Cho. "Agent, did you authenticate this video?" "Yes. I examined the digital fingerprint, the metadata, and the cloud storage logs. The video is authentic and unedited. The timestamp is accurate. This footage was recorded on February 14th of this year between 7:45 post-meridium and 9:16 post-meridium. Is there any possibility this video was tampered with or fabricated?" "None. The chain of custody was maintained. The cloud server records show continuous upload with no interruptions. The video file hash matches the original upload. This is genuine footage of the events that occurred that night. Vincent Harrow nodded. Your Honor, the state rests. Judge Kendrick looked at the defense table. Marcus Bellamy sat with his head in his hands. Eleanor was staring at the blank monitor, her lips moving silently, as if she were praying. But there were no prayers left that could save her. Mr. Bellamy, Judge Kendrick said, does the defense wish to cross-examine? Marcus stood slowly. He looked at Eleanor, and she looked back at him with eyes that were no longer performing. They were desperate. No questions, Your Honor, Marcus said quietly. The performance was over. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her cell. She had been denied bail after the video was shown. She was a flight risk now, a danger. The guards had taken her pearl earrings, her lace handkerchief, her carefully chosen gray dress. She wore an orange jumpsuit. She looked like what she was, a killer. She replayed the moment in her mind, the moment she had walked back into Daniel's house with the revolver in her hand. She had retrieved it from her car, where she had left it in the glove compartment. She had loaded it in the driveway, her hands perfectly steady. She had known exactly what she was going to do. Daniel had been standing in the kitchen, drinking a glass of water, when she came back in. He had looked surprised to see her. I told you to leave, he had said, and Eleanor had raised the gun and fired. She had watched him fall. She had watched the life leave his eyes, and she had felt nothing but satisfaction. Now, sitting in her cell, she felt something different. She felt the crushing weight of what was coming. The video had destroyed her. There was no defense left, no story she could tell. The jury had seen the truth. The next morning, Marcus Bellamy visited her. He sat across from her in the visitation room, and he looked exhausted. They are going to amend the charges, he said. Vincent Harrow is filing for first-degree murder. Eleanor nodded. She had known this was coming. Eleanor, I need you to understand something. With that video, there is no defense. The jury has seen you wait for over an hour, leave, retrieve a weapon, return, and shoot him. That is premeditation. That is murder. What are you saying? I am saying you need to consider a plea deal. Eleanor's eyes flashed with anger. No, absolutely not. Eleanor, if you go to trial on first-degree murder charges, you will be convicted. You will spend the rest of your life in prison. If you plead guilty to second-degree murder, the state might agree to a sentence of 25 years. You could be out in 15. I will be 83 years old. You will be alive. Eleanor stood and walked to the small window in the visitation room. Outside, she could see the courthouse where she had performed for the cameras. I am not pleading guilty. Why not? She turned to face him. Because I am not sorry. Marcus Bellamy stared at her. What? I am not sorry. Daniel was going to take Lily away from Rebecca. He was going to destroy my daughter's life. I did what needed to be done. Eleanor, that is not a legal defense. That is a confession. I do not care. Let them convict me. I will not stand in that courtroom and pretend I regret saving my family. Marcus closed his eyes. You did not save your family, Eleanor. You destroyed it. Rebecca testified against you. She called you a liar. Your granddaughter is going to grow up knowing her grandmother murdered her father. Lily will understand when she's older. No, Marcus said quietly. She will not. The trial resumed for closing arguments. The courtroom was even more packed than before. The video had made national news. Cable networks were running segments on grandmother killers and vigilante justice. Eleanor's face was on every screen in America. But Eleanor was done performing. She sat at the defense table in her orange jumpsuit, her face blank, her hands folded. She did not cry. She did not tremble. She just waited. Vincent Harrow gave his closing argument. He walked the jury through the evidence piece by piece. The footprints in the snow, the phone records showing Eleanor waiting, the ballistics proving deliberate aim, and finally, the video. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Vincent said, "you have seen the truth. Eleanor Whitaker did not accidentally shoot Daniel Cross. She did not act in a moment of panic. She planned it. She waited for him. She left to retrieve a weapon. She returned and executed him in his own kitchen. This is not an accident. This is not self-defense. This is premeditated, first-degree murder." He paused and looked at Eleanor. "The defendant wants you to see her as a grandmother, as a protector, as someone who was just trying to keep her family safe. But that is a performance. That is a lie. The truth is on that video. The truth is in her eyes when she walks back into that house with a gun. She knew what she was doing. She wanted to do it. And she did it in cold blood." Vincent returned to the prosecution table. "The state asks you to hold her accountable. Find her guilty of first-degree murder." Marcus Bellamy's closing argument was brief. There was not much he could say. He argued that Eleanor had genuinely believed Daniel was a threat to Lily, that her actions, while wrong, came from a place of misguided love. He asked the jury to consider second-degree murder instead of first-degree. But even as he spoke, he knew it was hopeless. The video had left no room for doubt. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forepersons stood and read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Eleanor Mae Whitaker, guilty of murder in the first degree." Eleanor did not react. She just sat there, staring straight ahead. Judge Kendrick set a sentencing hearing for 2 weeks later. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray April morning. The courtroom was quieter this time. The cameras were still there, but the spectacle had faded. Now there was only consequence. Rebecca Cross gave a victim impact statement. She stood at the podium, her voice shaking, and spoke directly to her mother. "You took my husband away from me," Rebecca said. "You took my daughter's father. You destroyed our family because you thought you knew better than everyone else. You thought you had the right to decide who lived and who died. But you did not have that right. You never had that right." Her voice broke. "Lily asks about you. She asks where her grandmother is, and I do not know what to tell her. How do I explain that the woman who used to bake her cookies and read her stories is a murderer? How do I explain that you cared more about control than you did about love?" Rebecca wiped her eyes. "I hope you spend the rest of your life thinking about what you have done. I hope you feel the weight of it every single day, because I will. Lily will. We will carry this for the rest of our lives." She sat down. Eleanor still did not cry. Then Judge Marion Kendrick spoke. She looked at Eleanor, and her voice was quiet, but filled with steel. "Ms. Whitaker, I have been on this bench for 31 years. I have seen thousands of defendants stand where you are standing. I have seen people who committed crimes out of desperation, out of fear, out of circumstances beyond their control. I have seen people who made terrible mistakes and were genuinely remorseful. And I have seen people like you." Eleanor finally looked up. "People like you," Judge Kendrick continued, "who believe the rules do not apply to them, who believe their judgment is superior to the law, who believe they have the right to take another human life because it suits their purposes. Judge Kendrick pulled out a transcript. Throughout this trial, you have performed. You cried for the cameras. You whispered prayers. You played the role of the grieving, misunderstood grandmother. You wanted this court, this jury, this community to see you as a victim. But that video showed us who you really are. She leaned forward. That video showed a woman who waited in the shadows. A woman who listened to her son-in-law defend himself and then calmly walked away to retrieve a weapon. A woman who returned with the express purpose of ending his life. A woman who fired a single, deliberate shot into his chest and then walked away without a second glance. The courtroom was silent. You did not call for help. You did not try to save him. You left him to bleed out on his kitchen floor while you drove home and prepared your alibi. You called your neighbor. You cried on cue. You told your story of an accident, knowing it was a lie. And you would have continued that lie if not for a camera you did not know was there. Judge Kendrick's voice grew harder. But the camera was there, and it captured the truth. It captured your face as you walked back into that house. It captured the cold calculation. It captured the moment you chose murder. She paused. Your daughter testified that you told her you would take care of Daniel. You meant those words literally. You decided he was a problem, and you eliminated him. You did not go to the police. You did not go to a family counselor. You did not pursue legal custody options. You chose violence. You chose death. Eleanor's hands were shaking now, but not from performance, from fear. And even now, Judge Kendrick said, you show no remorse. Your attorney told me you refused a plea deal because you are not sorry. You believe you were right. You believe you were justified. That, Ms. Whitaker, is what makes you dangerous. Not just your actions, but your absolute certainty that those actions were acceptable. Judge Kendrick picked up her sentencing order. This court finds that you are a danger to society. You have shown a willingness to take human life based on your own moral code, with no regard for the law or for the value of another person's existence. You have demonstrated arrogance, manipulation, and a complete lack of empathy. She looked Eleanor directly in the eyes. Daniel Cross was not a perfect man. He said cruel things in that hallway. He threatened to keep your granddaughter from you. But words are not justification for murder. Threats are not justification for execution. You had options. You chose the gun. Judge Kendrick read from the sentencing document. Eleanor Mae Whitaker, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of murder in the first degree. The law in the state of Kentucky allows for a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for this crime. Given the premeditated nature of your actions, the evidence of calculation and planning, and your complete lack of remorse, this court sees no reason to deviate from that sentence. She paused to let the words land. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will spend the remainder of your natural life in the custody of the Kentucky Department of Corrections. This is not a punishment designed to reform you. This is a punishment designed to protect society from you. You have proven that you believe yourself above the law, and the law is now removing you from society permanently. Judge Kendrick closed the file. You wanted to protect your family, Ms. Whitaker, but you have destroyed it instead. Your daughter has lost her husband. Your granddaughter has lost her father. And you have lost everything. That is not martyrdom. That is consequence. She banged the gavel once. This court is adjourned. Eleanor finally broke. The tears came, not gentle or controlled, but in great, wrenching sobs. Her shoulders shook. Her carefully maintained facade shattered completely. She reached for Marcus Bellamy, but he had already stood and was gathering his papers. The bailiffs approached. They placed handcuffs on Eleanor's wrists, the metal clicking into place with finality. As they led her from the courtroom, Eleanor looked back at the gallery. She looked for Rebecca, for some sign of forgiveness, some acknowledgement that she had been trying to help. But Rebecca was gone. She had left after her victim impact statement, taking Lily with her. They would not be there to watch Eleanor being taken away. They had already begun the process of moving forward, of building a life without her. Eleanor was escorted through the courthouse halls. The cameras were waiting. They filmed her being loaded into a transport van. They filmed her face, no longer serene or sorrowful, but broken and defeated. The performance was over. The audience had gone home. And Eleanor Mae Whitaker, once a retired schoolteacher who baked cookies for her granddaughter, was now a convicted murderer facing the rest of her life behind bars. In the weeks that followed, the case became a cautionary tale. Local news stations ran segments on warning signs of family violence. Community organizations set up hotlines for people in custody disputes, encouraging legal solutions over vigilante justice. Rebecca Cross gave an interview where she spoke about the importance of seeking help, of not letting anger and control spiral into tragedy. Daniel Cross's funeral was held on a quiet Tuesday. He was buried in the town cemetery, and the service was attended by his family, his co-workers, and people from the community who had known him as a flawed but decent man. Rebecca stood at his grave with Lily in her arms, and she cried for the husband she had lost and the mother she had discovered she never really knew. Eleanor adjusted to prison slowly. She was housed in a medium security facility 3 hours from Briar Hollow. She had a cellmate, a woman serving 20 years for embezzlement, who did not care about Eleanor's story or her justifications. In prison, everyone had a reason. Everyone thought they were right. But the bars were the same for all of them. Eleanor's hair turned fully white within 6 months. She stopped wearing makeup. She stopped performing. There was no one to perform for anymore. Rebecca brought Lily to visit once, when Lily was 6 years old. It was a brief visit, awkward and painful. Lily did not understand why her grandmother was behind glass. She did not understand why they could not hug. Eleanor tried to explain. She tried to say she had been trying to protect her. But Lily just looked confused, and Rebecca cut the visit short. It was the last time Eleanor saw her granddaughter. Years passed. Eleanor became just another inmate, another number, another old woman serving life. She attended chapel services on Sundays. She worked in the prison library. She wrote letters to Rebecca that were never answered. Sometimes, late at night, she would lie in her bunk and think about the video. She would think about the moment she walked back into Daniel's house with a gun in her hand. She would think about the look on his face when he saw her. She would think about the sound of the gunshot, the thud of his body hitting the floor. And she would tell herself she had been right. She would tell herself she had been protecting Lily. She would tell herself she had no choice. But deep down, in the parts of herself she tried not to examine, Eleanor knew the truth. She had had a choice. She had chosen murder. And now she would spend the rest of her life paying for that choice. Back in Briar Hollow, life moved on. Rebecca remarried eventually, to a kind man who treated Lily like his own daughter. Lily grew up healthy and loved. She knew her father had been killed, and she knew her grandmother was in prison. But as the years passed, those facts became distant, abstract. They were part of her history, but they did not define her. In the house where Daniel had died, a new family moved in. They painted the kitchen a cheerful yellow, They planted flowers in the garden. They filled the rooms with laughter and life. And in the nursery, the nanny camera stayed where it was, its small red light blinking in the darkness, a silent witness to the night that had changed everything. The light blinked on, and on, and on, a reminder that the truth, once recorded, could never be erased. That justice, though sometimes slow, was inevitable, and that a performance, no matter how convincing, would always end when the cameras finally revealed what had been hidden all along.